On the 7th of July 1943, a Ferdinand sat stopped on a Soviet mine outside the railway town of Ponyri. It was the heaviest tank destroyer Germany owned. The front plate was nearly 8 inches of solid steel, close to twice the armor on the nose of a Tiger, and the long 88mm gun inside it could destroy a T-34 at more than 1.5 miles. Nothing the Red Army drove that summer could beat that gun in a straight fight. And yet the machine died there in the mud, and the men who finished it carried rifles. The reason had nothing to do with the gun. The Ferdinand spec sheet is real, and it earns respect. Ferdinand Porsche built the hull. It weighed about 72 tons, heavier than a Tiger by nearly 10 tons, heavier than a T-34 by more than double. The 88mm gun was the long-barreled model. It was the same weapon that made the Tiger feared. In this hull, it reached even farther. Crews reported first-round hits on Soviet armor at ranges where the enemy could not even reply. A 76mm Soviet shell that struck the Ferdinand's front plate left a bright scar and bounced. In the entire battle, there is no confirmed record of a Ferdinand knocked out by a Soviet tank firing at its front. The machine only existed because of a lost argument. Porsche had built about 90 heavy hulls for his own Tiger design, and the German army chose a rival from Henschel instead. 90 finished hulls sat with no job. Rather than waste them, the army bolted an armored box and the big gun on top and called the result a tank destroyer. So the Ferdinand started life as a runner-up chassis, pressed into a role it was never drawn for. 91 were built. About 90 of them went to a single battle. The armor table left one thing off the page. The Ferdinand had no machine gun anywhere on it. Every other German fighting machine at Kursk carried at least one for close defense, the weapon a crew uses when infantry get in close. The Ferdinand had the biggest gun on the field and nothing at all to keep a man from walking up to it. And it could barely move. On a good road, it managed under 20 miles an hour. In soft ground, it crawled. 72 tons pressed it deep into the earth, and a machine that heavy leaves obvious track. The 2 units that took them to war were Heavy Tank Destroyer Battalion 653 and Heavy Tank Destroyer Battalion 654, grouped that June under Panzerjäger Regiment 656. They went to the northern face of the Kursk salient, the sector run by General Walter Model's 9th Army. Model's plan leaned on these machines to punch a hole through the deepest defensive belts the Soviets had ever dug. The Ferdinand was the battering ram. The ram broke on the first day. The Soviet commander on this face, Konstantin Rokossovsky, had guessed where the blow would land and had spent months preparing for it. His men buried mines in front of Ponyri, tens of thousands of them, in belts miles deep. Anti-tank guns covered every lane a heavy machine might take. The Ferdinand was crawling into the most heavily defended ground on the Eastern Front. Slow and exposed. Crews felt each mine before they saw it, a hard jolt, and then the machine slewing to a stop. Of the 45 Ferdinands that Battalion 653 sent forward on the 5th of July, all but 12 were stopped by mine damage before 5 that afternoon. A mine rarely destroyed the vehicle, blew a track or wrecked an idler wheel, and a Ferdinand with a broken track was finished as a fighting machine because it had no turret. A tank with a jammed track can still traverse its turret and shoot. The Ferdinand's gun was fixed in the hull. When the hull stopped turning, the gun stopped aiming. A mine turned the heaviest gun platform at Kursk into a steel box, one that could point only one way. On ground, the Soviets had ranged weeks in advance. The second problem was the one the crews could do nothing about. Once a Ferdinand stopped, Soviet infantry closed on it. There was no machine gun to sweep them off. A man could crouch against the hull, below the gun's aim, in the one place the 88 could never point. Inside the steel, the crew heard boots on the deck above them. Trapped, they could do nothing but wait. Soviet soldiers climbed onto the engine deck at the rear and pushed incendiary bottles through the grills onto the hot engine. Fire did what a 76mm shell could not. Sappers ran up with satchel charges and packed them against the running gear. The most heavily armored vehicle on the battlefield was helpless against a desperate man with a bottle and a match. Heinz Guderian, the general in charge of Germany's armored forces, watched the reports come in and wrote it plainly afterward. His words: once they had broken through into the enemy's infantry zone, they literally had to go quail shooting with cannons. They did not manage to neutralize, let alone destroy, the enemy's rifle and machine guns, so that our own infantry was unable to follow up behind them. A cannon built to destroy tanks at 1.5 miles was useless against a rifleman 20 feet away. And because the Ferdinands could not clear that infantry, the German foot soldiers behind them could not advance to protect. The armor and the infantry came apart, and each was worse off alone. Nowhere did this hurt more than at Ponyri. The soldiers on both sides called it the Stalingrad of Kursk. It was a grinding, brutal fight. Battalion 654 was sent to take the railway station, and the fighting there was house to house, close and slow, fought through rubble and cellars. Every advantage the Ferdinand had was built for open ground and long range. In among the buildings, a gun that reached 1.5 miles reached nothing at all, because there was nothing that far away to shoot. The town changed hands again and again over 4 days. The Ferdinands that rolled into Ponyri were fighting the exact battle they were least built to fight. Some of them never reached the enemy at all because the machine broke itself. Porsche had given the Ferdinand an unusual drive. 2 gasoline engines did not turn the tracks directly. Instead, they ran generators, and the electric current from those generators drove motors at the rear that turned the track. It was clever, and on a 72-ton vehicle it ran hot, and it ran hard. Engines caught fire climbing slopes. The drivetrain wore out hauling a weight it was never designed to carry. A share of the Ferdinands at Kursk were lost with no enemy involved, stopped by their own overworked machinery in the middle of a battlefield. And when one broke down, it tended to stay broken because recovering it turned into its own defeat. A Ferdinand weighed about 72 tons. To tow one, the Germans needed as many as 5 18-ton half-tracks chained together in a line, and those recovery vehicles had no armor. Soviet artillery ranged the stranded Ferdinands and shelled the recovery teams the moment they came forward. So a Ferdinand that a mine had merely lamed, a machine a day in a workshop could have saved, was often left where it stopped. Its own crew burned it so the Soviets could not take it. The weight that made it nearly impervious was the same weight that made it impossible to rescue. The loss breakdown is the whole argument. About 90 Ferdinands went into the northern offensive. 39 were irreparably lost. When Soviet teams went over the wrecks afterward and logged how each one died, the pattern was clear. The largest share had been stopped by mines. A great many burned after infantry got incendiary bottles or fuel onto the engine deck. Several failed mechanically. Their engines caught fire climbing the slopes, worn out under a weight the drivetrain was never designed to haul. A handful were penetrated by artillery firing into their thinner side plates, which were half the thickness of the front. One was destroyed by a direct hit from a Soviet dive bomber. Almost none were lost to a Soviet tank shooting them. The one thing the Ferdinand was built to win, the gun duel, it very nearly never lost. And while the machines were dying to mines and fire, the gun kept doing exactly what it was built to do. The crews of Battalion 653 claimed hundreds of Soviet tanks knocked out over the summer's fighting, many tanks destroyed for each Ferdinand they lost. Those are German claims, and wartime claims run high on every side, so treat the exact figure with care. The direction of it is not in doubt. Give the gun a clear target, and that target was knocked out. Beat the Ferdinand was never the shooting. It was the mine before it and the man on foot after it. That is the case, laid out in the wreckage. The gun was magnificent. The armor was untouchable from the front, and the machine still lost because it could not defend itself up close and it could not move once it was hurt. Germany had built a sniper and sent it into a knife fight. The German army agreed, though it never said so out loud. At the end of 1943, the 48 Ferdinands that survived were pulled back and rebuilt. The single biggest change was a hull machine gun, bolted into the front so the crew could finally sweep infantry off their own vehicle. They also added a cupola, so the commander could see close threats before they reached the hull. The rebuilt machine got a new name. The fix was the exact thing the vehicle had lacked at Kursk. The design admitted, in steel, what the loss reports had already proven. But the fix came too late for the machines at Ponyri. 39 of them were already gone, most stopped by mines and finished by fire, hardly any beaten by a better tank. The Ferdinand was never outgunned. It was stopped, and then it was climbed on. The front plate the Red Army could not crack for a full day meant nothing. Once a soldier stood on the engine deck, in the one blind spot the 88 could not reach. A gun is only as dangerous as the machine that carries it, and a machine that cannot move and cannot look after itself is a fortress waiting for someone to walk up to the door.